something else to your title every time you come on. Do you sleep? I mean, what's the deal?
That's up for debate whether I sleep or not, but I got to tell you, it's fun because it's a reality check like you guys do right here on the couch on all kinds of issues.
Love it.
Also, I liked this at the intro. For your name,
Just,
like this.
Yeah.
Hey,
Good man. There we go. All right, let's get to it.
Exactly.
This morning, Secretary of State Pompeo and Defense Secretary James Mattis briefing House members on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And in the next hour, the Senate is set to consider amendments to a bill that would end U.S. support of the Saudi-led war against Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. President Trump has condemned the killing of Khashoggi, but he is standing by the Saudi Crown Prince. In the meantime, independent Senator Bernie Sanders, a sponsor of the Senate resolution under consideration, says the U.S.
start the White House with Kevin Corkin. Kevin, what is the
civil war? Here he is on Special Report last night.
What's going on in Yemen now, Brett, is the worst humanitarian disaster facing this planet. We have got to do everything in our power, and we have the power to bring the Saudis and the Houthis together to end the incredible destruction which is taking place.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill with more. Mike.
Melissa, good afternoon to you. We expect votes on the Senate floor much of this afternoon on that resolution and amendments related to the Saudi-Yemen matter. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is being very blunt about the Jamal Khashoggi murder.
Do you really want to transfer your most advanced technology to somebody who thinks it's okay to lure a journalist to a consulate in Turkey if you're a Saudi and chop him up and think you're going to get away with it? For those who want a normal military-to-military relationship with Saudi Arabia, count me in. What is going on is not normal.
On the House side of the Capitol today, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were here first thing this morning to brief House lawmakers on the Khashoggi murder. The next chairman of the House Intelligence Committee says it's time to take a closer look at the U.S. relationship with the kingdom.
I think the murder of Khashoggi ought to cause us to rethink this extraordinary reliance that we have placed on Saudi Arabia. It's really my intention next year to, through our committee, do a deep dive on Saudi Arabia, on the war in Yemen, on the Saudi role in the peace process.
A key foreign policy Republican in the House says some lawmakers are using this as an opportunity to go after President Trump's foreign policy, accusing the president's critics of selective outrage.
Look, there's 500,000 people dead in Syria, not near that in Yemen. Yemen's a tragedy, but there are people now on the other side of the aisle speaking up way more about Khashoggi in Yemen than they ever have about Syria. So it's important in these issues and in these discussions to be rational and reasonable while still holding true to our principles.
A huge issue today on both sides of the Capitol, with House lawmakers getting their closed-door briefing and the Senate voting to express its unhappiness with Saudi behavior. Melissa?
Mike Emanuel, thank you so much for that. David Webb, I'll bring it out to you. First of all, Democrats saying there are tremendous reliance on Saudi Arabia. I don't see that. We're not relying on them for energy. Maybe a partnership in the Middle East.
Partnership locally. Yeah. Look, first of all, I thought you were going to say Jeff Flake when you said Bernie Sanders. Oh. And now I find it funny and hypocritical that Bernie Sanders gives a you-know-what about Yemen. They don't care about Libya. They don't care about sub-Saharan Africa. They don't care about any of that. First thing, to every politician, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat watching this, ignore them. Talk about one word, realpolitik. Trump is not wrong. The Khashoggi is one incident, and it's tragic and it's terrible. On the other hand, do you throw out a global need and an occasional important partnership in the Middle East over one person? I know that's tough for people to swallow, but the reality is we don't need a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Saudis will engage if Iran goes. Syria, another important aspect of this. Why not deal with that issue? So it's much more complex than either we have a relationship or we don't. It's puerile for these senators to think, no matter what side they're on, Graham or Schiff in the House, to think that's how it actually works.
But Adrian, it's not just one person. I mean, this is, sort of an example of how they treat human rights in the kingdom. Isn't that kind of what's at stake?
Exactly. And I think, look, I do agree with you that the difficult situation that we're facing here is that Saudi Arabia is a key ally of ours in the Middle East and the United States, and it's an occasional partner that we need to work on, especially national security issues, to protect our own security with. But at the same time, the way that President Trump has handled the death of Jamal Khashoggi, who, by the way, was a United States, I mean, he lived in the United States.
He wasn't an American.
But he was a resident of the United States. The fact that he is not condemned, the fact that he is, to an extent, sided with the prince, that is where we have some real issues. He could actually use this. He could actually use this as leverage to have a little bit more play with Saudi Arabia.
I want to take a step. Well, let me get in here because I want to give some perspective on where we are with Saudi Arabia and Iran. A year ago tomorrow, Nikki Haley gave a big presentation to reporters in front of an Iranian-fired missile from Yemen into Saudi Arabia at the Riyadh airport. The goal was to hit civilians. They have since fired a number of these missiles in. The UN has acknowledged that these weapons are coming from Iran. Here's the issue. Do we want a Hezbollah front on the border of Yemen and Saudi Arabia? Iran is preparing for a regional war. They've done it in Lebanon. They've done it in Syria. They're doing it in Iraq. They're doing it in Yemen. This is not about the civil war in Yemen. This is about the war that Iran is planning to take on in the Middle East against our allies, against U.S. interests, against Israel. And the bottom line is Bernie Sanders and all these politicians on Capitol Hill can say that the Houthis need to come together in that country for some diplomatic solution. The Houthis are not interested in any diplomatic solution. They want power, they want control, and Iran wants control of the Yemen border because they have this regional goal of getting Hezbollah-like fronts in every single part of the Middle East that they can. And by the way, Hezbollah before 9/11 was the number one terrorist organization responsible for murders of Americans. So to say this isn't in our interest, it absolutely is. And to give up that strategic partnership over one person who was not an American citizen is insane.
Okay, not all Republicans are on the president's side. Here's what Tom Reed had to say.
I think, given the nature of the circumstances here, it would be appropriate to impose those types of sanctions, and I would split with our party, if you would, in order. But I think there's many Republicans as well as Democrats that would agree some type of penalty needs to be imposed.
So a couple of things here. To Adrian's point, I find it a little rich that a lot of the proponents of the Iran deal and trying to reset relationships with the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism are thumbing their nose at President Trump right now. That's a little hypocritical in my book. Regarding what's going on Capitol Hill, the House already scuttled this resolution. So essentially nothing's actually going to move forward until next Congress. Personally, I think a lot of this will subside by then. So ultimately, ultimately the objective of Congress and the Senate right now is to try to deter President Trump in his decision making and his viewpoint of Saudi Arabia. Certainly doesn't look like that's going to happen. President Trump has been resolute in the relationship with Saudi Arabia and standing behind them and moving that relationship forward. So I think ultimately this is going to end up subsiding, and it's certainly not going to deter the president in his decision making.
You have to look at this in the world of where it actually exists, not in the political punditry, which is what you get out of D.C. We have a complex situation in the Middle East. You talk about Iran's hegemonic goals and aspirations and their actions. You look at the role the Saudis play geographically, militarily, and financially, because they are a foothold in the Middle East where we do have divergent interests and convenient interests. So Khashoggi and the incident, with all due respect to the politicians, is not the issue. The larger picture is the Middle East, because while Khashoggi will fade off and fade away eventually, in the Middle East, if Saudi Arabia is further diminished, they're going to be pushed into buying from other nations, weaponry and other things. On top of that, what will they do in their relationship to us when they get into that next term war in the Middle East?
But I think one thing that it does do, though, is it reminds you what kind of place the kingdom actually is. And we had gotten to a place where, the Crown Prince was trying to act like he was trying to modernize the whole kingdom. And in many ways, Katie, doesn't it remind you why we have so much common with Israel?
Right.
And why Israel is our natural ally in the region because of their value for human rights and democracy. It's just, you can say Khashoggi thing fades away. That's painful to hear because you're talking about someone who was chopped up. This is a kingdom where they do things like this.
Look, this is why when people attack Israel, especially on the left, it makes absolute no sense, because it is the only democracy that actually does care about human rights and preserving the rights, not only of themselves, but of even their enemies. But in terms of Saudi Arabia, look, these places don't change overnight. They take a long time to change. Is this incident an indication that things have changed? Absolutely not. But again, you have to put it into the context of who are we willing to work with and who are we willing as the United States to negotiate with in terms of our shipping channels, weaponry, who they're going to be allies with. Is Russia then going to come in and say, well, we'll be out, or China come in? I mean, there are bigger pictures here that are more long term, and there are things that can be done economically to punish Saudi Arabia for the Khashoggi murder, at the same time completely taking out the U.S. support, which is our interests against Iran and Yemen, is an overreach, to say the least.
Okay, and for you out in the audience, you may be wondering, where in the world is Harris Faulkner? She is going to sit down with President Trump less than an hour from now at the White House for an exclusive interview on Outnumbered Overtime. Keep it right here, top of the hour, Harris and the president. A new bombshell in the Mueller investigation. A judge is demanding the special counsel turn over documents related to Michael Flynn's interview with the FBI, and Flynn's lawyer suggesting he was set up. Now, what former FBI Director James Comey said about this, that is raising a few eyebrows. Plus, the president sounding off for the first time on his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, who was sentenced to prison yesterday. This as Democrats move to have Cohen return to Capitol Hill.
Michael Cohen, as someone who lived in Trump's three worlds, personal, political, and financial, he knows where all the bodies are buried. And so I think a come clean moment for the American people to understand what candidate Trump knew about Russia's intentions to do business with him.
Fallout now from the sentencing of President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, and potential new complications for the president as the DOJ announces it's reached a deal with another former associate of the president. On the same day of Cohen's sentencing, the owner of the National Enquirer, led by American Media Inc. chief David Pecker, admitted to paying off a former Playboy playmate to prevent her story about an alleged affair with the president from getting out. Then this morning, the president weighing in for the first time on the Cohen sentencing, tweeting, "I never directed Michael Cohen to break the law. He was a lawyer and he is supposed to know the law. It is called advice of counsel, and a lawyer has great liability if a mistake is made. That is why they get paid." Earlier on America's Newsroom, Bill Hemmer spoke to former Cohen attorney and now advisor Lanny Davis and asked him what advice Mr. Cohen gave his then client.
Did Cohen know at the time that he was making a payment that it was against the law?
He said to the prosecutors, yes, I knew it was about the election. That's what we talked about. And that's what we now know that the publication involved.
If he knew it was illegal, did he tell the president at the time?
I don't know what his advice was to Mr. Trump.
All this as top Democrats are calling for a re-examination of whether a sitting president can be indicted. Here's Senator Richard Blumenthal earlier.
I believe very strongly that the president himself can be indicted. There's no constitutional bar to it. I'm going to be asking the Office of Legal Counsel for an opinion that, in effect, retracts its prior opinion indicating that the president cannot be indicted, because I think the president himself could be indicted.
So, Melissa, while we were watching that interview earlier with Lanny Davis, you kept saying that's huge. Why is that?
Well, because, I mean, the point, Bill Hemmer's question was spot on. Did Michael Cohen know it was illegal? Yes. As Trump's attorney, did he say, you want me to do this thing? It's illegal. Lanny Davis said, I don't know. That's pretty key. If he's saying, I don't know, that means he didn't tell him it was illegal. I would also say, I mean, the other thing that undermines the case a lot is that I bet President Trump has done this before, and long before he was running for office. So to say it was a campaign contribution, you know, if he's done it before in the past, that undermines that case. All that said, I mean, obviously it's very yucky. You know, I mean, it's not a great thing. He lied about it, the president, it seems, but that doesn't become, you know, a felony or whatever it is that they're ramping up to.
And to your point, the former FEC chairman or Commissioner Bradley Smith has previously said that he didn't necessarily think this was criminal because, to your point, President Trump could have been doing this to protect his business, protect his marriage, for other reasons outside of the campaign. As President Trump tweeted, look, Michael Cohen was my attorney. He's supposed to know the law. Fair. And so I think on the legal side of this, it's sort of murky how much liability President Trump has and how much exposure he has from the legal front. My understanding, too, of the law is that there's a high burden of proof in campaign finance violations to prove intent. So I don't know how much trouble he's in there legally. I think on the political side of thing, which is my expertise, he is in trouble in terms of Congress and the House looking forward to moving forward on impeachment issues, also the investigations we're going to see next Congress. So to me, from a political lens, that is where he's going to be getting the most heat and faces the most
and there's always
landmines.
Ethics. Don't forget ethics.
Yeah.
Well,
David, on the campaign trail, Democrats and Nancy Pelosi cautioned Democrats against talking about impeachment on the campaign trail. Now that Democrats have control of the House, impeachment seems to be something that they're perfectly comfortable with talking about publicly.
Well, Democrats running as moderates to govern as progressives, and those progressives running as hypocrites against ICE, against impeachment, for impeachment. So let's ignore that, because all that is campaign fodder. Here's where this issue really lies. This was always about tying someone to Trump. What Michael Cohen did that was criminally liable for him, and even Mark Penn says this, and it's true, would have been to bring him into tax court on bank fraud and other things that would have led to more serious crimes. Tangential, they went after something that's political, often settled by a fine. Civil, you were right about the FEC commissioners. I've spoken to former commissioners myself. It will go nowhere. It's the political damage against the president they're seeking. And frankly, good luck. Go for impeachment. Use anything you can to try and do that in the House. Then try to get it through the Senate and watch the American people react.
But Adrian, are Democrats really going to now use Michael Cohen as a way to get at President Trump and give him any kind of credibility based on a series of misstatements that he has made?
Well, first of all, I think that you can't. I think that I understand the president's tweet this morning, but I think it's pretty rich of him to go out there and say, well, I didn't know that this is illegal. This is my attorney's job. He was running for the president of the United States. He should know what the campaign finance laws are. And that includes a massive illegal payment to pay off the National Enquirer from a catch-and-kill
Most
story.
candidates don't know the campaign finance laws. Believe me,
I
they're
would think that they would
convoluted.
understand that a $150,000 payment to kill a story is a campaign violation.
Was it about the campaign? If it's about the president trying to pay off for not getting the embarrassment with his wife or whatever, that's personal.
Which would
therefore
impact
not
his election
illegal.
chances. That's where the campaign violation
I want to get to a final question for Lisa real quickly on the political side of this. President Trump said on Air Force One he didn't know anything about these payments. Now he's admitting that he knew about these payments. Are people going to care about that? Does that really matter? Or is it going to be something that gets lost in the talk about the situation?
Well, if I'm being completely truthful, I think if this was Vice President Mike Pence, this would be a different conversation, right? And I think to Melissa's point, I mean, look, there's probably been these payments before. Right. President Trump has admitted previously in sort of his relationship, his marriages of, going outside of the bounds there. So, I don't necessarily think from that lens that's going to hurt him as much. I think it's ultimately the investigations. However, to David's earlier point, the roadblock for Democrats is the Senate that's going to have a 53 Republican majority. They're not going to get the 2/3 supermajority, that's 60 votes in the Senate. So ultimately impeachment would end in the House.
And by the way, the American people care more about the sexual harassment payout with taxpayer dollars when it comes to both sides of the aisle. Right. And Jackie Spear and Emmanuel Cleaver will keep contradicting each other and others on this.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, not going away, that's for sure. All right, a new tweet from the president raising questions about funding for his long-promised border wall as Congress battles over a spending bill to avoid a partial government shutdown. So can lawmakers strike a deal on time? And what could be the political fallout if they don't? Plus, a day after a bombshell allegation from Michael Flynn's legal team, a federal judge is demanding answers from special counsel Robert Mueller. What this could mean for Flynn's sentencing, coming up next.
Turn over documents after a bombshell claim from lawyers for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. He has pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, but in court filing yesterday, lawyers claim Flynn was encouraged to talk to investigators without a lawyer. One of the FBI agents present for that interview was Peter Strzok, the same agent who was fired after his anti-Trump text messages surfaced. Now remarks from former FBI Director James Comey are surfacing. Comey was at a forum over the weekend claiming that he took advantage of the chaotic early days of the Trump White House to get his agents in.
Something I probably wouldn't have done or maybe gotten away with in a more organized investigation, a more organized administration, in the George W. Bush administration, for example, or the Obama administration. So if the FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official, you would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over.
In the meantime, senior judicial analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano says Flynn's claim adds a whole new layer to this saga.
The government has recommended a sentence that is unprecedented, 0 jail time. Instead of just waiting for the 0 jail time to come, he's going right into the government's face and saying, you set me up. We may want to sue the government for setting me up, a nearly impossible suit in which to prevail. And therefore, we want to see your memoranda and your notes. And last night, a judge agreed.
And not surprisingly, someone who agrees with all that is the president, who tweeted, they gave General Flynn a great deal because they were embarrassed by the way he was treated. The FBI said he didn't lie, and they overrode the FBI. They want to scare everybody into making up stories that are not true by catching them in the smallest misstatements. Sad. I mean, you have to slap a sad on the end.
Yeah.
What do you make of these new developments, and why in the world is James Comey sitting at the 92nd Street Y here in New York talking about the fact that, you know, they pulled a fast one on the administration and, you know, didn't follow what is, you know, FBI protocol?
Well, that actually doesn't surprise me. I know officers who worked with him when he was here in New York. I call it tall man syndrome. He has to be the smartest man in the room, smartest than any other. But I think we ought to pay attention to this case, because something that Judge Sullivan did, and he's got a good history. You look at this judge's record. He doesn't call for judicial review prior to decisions, certain points in cases. Judges in general don't do this unless there are troubling matters brought forward. Peter Strzok, James Comey, the methods they used, and the trap, the perjury trap or entrapment in form, if there's even a hint of that, any judge that's reasonable will take a look at this and say, this is beyond how you should operate. And I think this is a big warning to the DOJ.
Adrian, let me ask you the flip side of that, which is, shouldn't the White House counsel have known, you know, if the FBI is coming over? No, you may not. There are protocols that we have to follow in order to do this. And also, you know, General Flynn without a lawyer, he's a general. You know, maybe he should have known I don't want to do it without a lawyer.
Well, I think absolutely. I mean, General Flynn has been around for a long time, and I think that he would by now know his rights and his rights to have counsel present. But at the same time, I also don't think that James Comey going out there and saying what he just said at the 92Y is very helpful either. It only adds more questions and sort of like adds more to some of these theories out there on the FBI.
But they're not conspiracy theories if they're actually becoming true.
He's admitting that he actually took
But
advantage
I don't think,
of this.
I don't think James Comey coming out and speaking on really anything at this point is helpful to either side. But I also want to make it clear, this judge is known for protecting defendants' rights. That's what he does. So it's not a surprise that he's trying to collect all the information to make sure that, in his view, Mike Flynn was actually protected and knew of his rights.
Which is the right position, because the burden is on the prosecutor. And I think it's important.
Lisa, I'm eager to see the evidence that either side has, because this is a claim we hear again and again, that the Mueller investigation and the FBI is basically pressuring, tricking people into saying things that aren't true. That's a big claim. And if it's true, I want to see the evidence.
Well, and congressional investigators have been trying to get the 302s from the conversations FBI agents had with Flynn, as well as the transcript of the conversation with Kislyak, because remember, Comey and McCabe told Congress they didn't think that, or the takeaway was that Flynn did not lie, and then he pleads to lying once Mueller takes over the investigation. Also, my biggest problem is going all the way back to the very beginning. The FBI agents had no reason to talk to Flynn in the first place. As the incoming national security advisor, he had every right to talk to Kislyak about sanctions. That was his job. There's nothing nefarious about that. Yet Sally Yates told Congress that the Obama administration was worried about the Logan Act, a 218-year-old law. No one's ever been prosecuted for it. That is a complete farce. So I have problems with why the FBI agents ever talked to Flynn in the first place.
I would be curious about whether President Trump regrets firing Michael Flynn, because he was fired because he lied to Vice President Mike Pence about some of the conversations that he had. Now, in terms of the FBI going in, yes, you would think you want a lawyer, but if the conversation was, we're just going to come over and get to know you as a new administration, as the new national security advisor, and they aren't saying you're under investigation, we're coming to have a talk with you about what we're investigating, want to ask you some questions, then they essentially lied about getting into the White House to ask him those questions in the first place.
But I would also think that if you are meeting with the FBI, you would want to have counsel present.
But not if you're the national security advisor, getting to know the government and new government agencies, and you're working with them, and then then months later, they decide to come up with these
charges. We could argue about
charges.
this one forever. Let's argue about something else. For example, President Trump adding a new twist to the border wall funding battle. Earlier this week, President Trump said he would be willing to shut down the government if he doesn't get his $5 billion for his wall. He tweeted this morning, "I've often stated one way or the other, Mexico is going to pay for the wall. This has never changed. Our new deal with Mexico and Canada, the USMCA, is so much better than the old one, very costly, an anti-USA NAFTA deal, that just by the money we save, Mexico is paying for the wall." That new trade deal that was signed with Canada and Mexico still needs to be approved by Congress. That is true. Adrian, I will start with you because William Longinus is out there doing reporting today from Fox News Channel on what we're really talking about here. For the $5 billion to be spent would go on things like 215 miles of additional wall. I mean, there's 650 miles of barrier right now. That doesn't seem like a big increase, and it doesn't seem it's the same style of fence that we already have. So maybe what we're fighting about is that silly word wall as opposed to like the actual material that is being proposed.
Yeah, and I think border fencing is something else that Democrats are using, to sort of describe this. But look, the bottom line is this. If the government shuts down, it's squarely on President Trump. We heard it with our own ears. We watched it with our own eyes in the meeting with Chuck and Nancy. Democrats have made it very...
fine with that.
And by the way, he is fine with that. And I'm not surprised by this because this is something that he talked a lot about on the campaign trail. Who's not fine with it are Senate Republicans. They don't want this to be on them because ultimately, even though it will be on Trump, it will also be on them. So you've got, people like John Cornyn, number 2 Senate Republican, John Thune, the number 3 Senate Republican.
I love that everyone's on a first name basis.
I don't know what this strategy is.
I love that everyone's on a first name basis with Chuck and Nancy.
I would also say by the time everybody goes to vote again for
they'll
anything,
forget
no one's going to remember
this
shutdown. Not that Republicans, I don't know. The shutting down the government doesn't sound so bad to me. Katie, let me ask you. So if you're intellectually honest about these things, when he says, okay, NAFTA, we redid this deal and we're getting more money from them, that can go to pay for the wall. It sounds very much to me like when I'm making the argument in my head, well, I didn't buy that purse. I saved that money over there so I can go do this. I mean, we all shift money around in our household and say, well, we did this with them, and so we're not paying, so now that pays for that. What do you think?
Like Mexico is going to pay for the wall is a campaign promise that the president made, and because he is all about this promises made, promises kept slogan, he's doing his best to try and talk about how Mexico could pay for it. The bottom line is that Democrats have voted for this type of fencing before. If they really want to, in the year of 2018, talk about open borders, they should just admit the fact that they aren't interested in voting the same way that they did in 2006. A lot of this money is already allocated. They just need to actually put it into place and build the fence. And so it's all about just making good on what Democrats have done.
Can we get rid of the pay for the wall thing with one thing simple, which is the president said they would pay for it, whether they do it. They didn't say they would prepay for it. Not that they're going to write it.
I think he was thinking the trade deal was...
But the fact is, if you
let me address Katie's
funding,
other point, though, because she's right, that in 2006, a majority of Senate Democrats voted for 700 miles of double fencing. We're talking about 215 here.
It was the Secure Fence Act.
Remember what I said about hypocrisy.
A quick reminder, just about 20 minutes from now at 1 p.m., Harris Faulkner will sit down with President Trump. You do not want to miss that on Outnumbered Overtime. But before the top of the hour, Harris is going to give us a preview of what he's going to say. Stay tuned for that. First Lady Melania Trump speaking out about what she calls opportunists in the media and about her husband in a rare on-camera interview with Fox News' Sean Hannity. What we learned from that conversation next.
Melania Trump speaking out in an interview with Sean Hannity. It's just her second television interview since arriving at the White House. The First Lady calling out those whom she accuses of going after her family and her family in order to advance themselves.
It doesn't hurt. The problem is they writing the history, and it's not correct. They like to focus on the gossip, and I would like to that they focus on the substance and what we do, not just about nonsense.
So, David, this interview came as she was touring and visiting with military members and thanking them for their service. But what she's saying is very interesting, because she's also said in a past interview that she was concerned about people still working in the White House who did not have the best interests of the administration in mind.
Yeah, first of all, they've tried in some segments in the media, I won't say everyone, to somehow paint her as someone different than what she's. A very intelligent woman. She clearly is an asset to the president, an asset to, call it, the family approach to this. And she has a platform that matters, whether it's against bullying, a number of other platforms she's taken on. So when the press goes out or individuals go out and attack her, they're violating one of the first rules in America. Most people don't like you attacking the First Lady in America. It's not going to work. And I think that is something that we ought to consider in the media.
Lisa?
Well, if I was Melania Trump, I wouldn't sit down with the media either. The media has treated the Trump administration heinously, and essentially everyone that gets caught in President Trump's orbit, the media tries to destroy. Whether it's cabinet officials like calling Jeff Sessions a racist, even at Facebook, for instance, doing something with that the Obama administration did, Hillary Clinton administration did, and then just because it was done with the Trump administration in Cambridge Analytica regarding the data collection, now it's an issue. So essentially anyone that gets caught in President Trump's orbit, the media tries to destroy them. So if you're Melania Trump, why sit down with them? And plus they pay attention to, stupid things like what kind of heel she's wearing. And I imagine if you're part of the Trump administration and Melania Trump, how frustrating would that be when you're actually trying to get substantive things done? All they want to talk about is what kind of shoes you're wearing.
I don't know if it's frustrating or revealing, because it's, people that are supposed to be pro-women, who are supposed to support other women, or who are standing there and calling the president a misogynist, and then they turn around in the next breath and attack Melania on things like, hair, clothing, all of these different things. It just shows how hypocritical so many are.
Adrian.